I've only been on the back of a motorbike once in my life, and it terrified me.
You're a wise man.
You were a motorcyclist at one time. What was your favourite bike?
Oh, my word. Because of what they did to me, favourite is probably not the right word. They were my... Is there such a thing as nemesis?
I guess so, yeah.
I had a... Oh, my God, it's such a long time ago. I had a Yamaha motocrosser, which should have stayed off the road, I expect. But I didn't. I used to ride it around on roads, and maybe I fancied myself as a bit of an Evel Knievel type. 17, 18, full of testosterone. Or Eddie Kidd even. Remember Eddie Kidd?
Yeah,
the British version of Evel Knievel?
Yeah.
He came a cropper as well. And yes, inevitably an over-exuberance combined with a lack of skill, put those two together and they add up to disaster.
Right, but it was a way, because you talk about it on your website, you talk about going on your bike and putting the OS map back in, and taking your Canon camera out on location. What sort of stuff were you shooting in those days?
I was just shooting mostly kind of landscape, seascape, not particularly good perhaps. Didn't really think about composition or technicalities very much. Just enjoyed riding around on my motorbike with my camera, stopping every now and then, taking a few snaps, because they were just snaps. Excuse me. And that's it. That's the enjoyment I derived from it, really. There was no pretensions to selling it or get into a situation where it might be a living. It was just pure fun.
Right. So, as a hobby, what were your aspirations at the time, being a 17, 18-year-old going around on your motorbike? You were going out, you were going to lovely locations within Pembrokeshire, I guess, because you are from Haverfordwest.
Yeah.
Were you looking for something specific, or was it just liking being out on the road?
It was a complete scattergun approach. Jump on my bike, go out. If I see something, photograph it, and that's about it, really. There was no sounds a bit pretentious. There was no art to it. There was no thought. It was just recreational, fun, hobby.
And what did you want to be at that time?
I don't know.
I still don't know what I want to be.
At the age of 17 or 18, I had, if I'm being perfectly honest, I drifted quite aimlessly through school and achieved pretty much nothing, and sort of fell into jobs and had no... I think these days perhaps younger people, they might have an idea of where they're heading. I had no idea whatsoever. I took it day by day, had no grand plan, no strategy, just went to work, which gave me the money to pay for my petrol and going to the pub and buying rolls of film. And that's about as strategic as it got.
Okay, so your photographic...
I'm not helping you here, am I?
Yeah, well, no. I think we're going to get somewhere in a minute now. So buying film was an important part of the whole thing. Yeah,
well, you remember film days. It was film days are obviously a lot more tactile and involving to a point, because unless you had a dark room, you did half the process, and then the other half, which I think is equally as important, the processing, you handed over to some machine in a cheap lab somewhere, which pumped out a load of crappy photos, which you got back and put in the drawer.
Right. Do you still look at those
photos?
No. Those
I shouldn't say no, because that sounds a bit disparate or dismissive. I've got some in some albums somewhere. I might come across them occasionally, but I don't kind of seek them out or anything.
So where did the change come where you decided that yeah, photography is something I want to pursue.
That came many years later. Lots of things happened, some good, some not so good. And then I went to university eventually to sort of prove to myself that I wasn't as dumb as my results from school suggested. Then got a string of jobs which were uninspiring and office-based and awful. And I ended up in, and this is the real killer, the Department for Work and Pensions, which doesn't really engender thoughts of happy days at work.
Right.
And I probably spent, much like in school, I spent most of my work days looking out the window thinking, there must be something more to life than this, surely. Mm-hmm. And then...
Were you still taking photographs?
Yeah, kind of occasionally. Occasionally I'd take the camera out. But it got to a point where about 13 or 14 years ago, I thought I can either stay here and slowly go mad, or I can get a job in a similar place and then go mad there instead, or I can do something completely different. So I thought I'd have a go at photography, as in have a go properly.
Right. Do you remember that time when you said, right, I'm going to start... Did you start studying photography? Were you looking at other people's work? Or?
I bought a... Oh, my word. Let's think now. Would have been about 2003. I bought a EMYR 645, which was a very nice camera, and went out and took some photos and thought, can this go anywhere? And I thought, only if I become digital, because my idea was that I would take photos and sell them. Well, there's no room here for a dark room, and again, the age-old problem of taking a roll of film and then sending it off to a lab and getting back stuff which doesn't really match what you saw in your head. So I joined Tenby Camera Club, and then I remember around about November 2003, Ivan from Celtic Vision, I think it was called, or something, in Narberth, the camera shop, came along to do a talk on digital cameras, and he had a Canon 300D.
Oh, yes.
And I thought, wow, that looks nice. And I realised that if I wanted to achieve what I wanted, that I kind of had planned in my head, I needed a digital camera because I needed to be able to process them myself rather than send them off. So I bought that. And then I suppose the thing that really encouraged me and gave me self-belief was I took a photo which I entered into all camera clubs in Wales belong to a federation, Welsh Photographic Federation, I think it's called, or something like that. And once a year they have this huge jamboree where all the camera clubs in Wales individuals can enter images. And I entered this image and it won a category.
So what was the image?
The image was of Texaco oil refinery, but not the kind of image they'd want to use in publicity materials. Yeah. It was quite a dark image, but it won. I can't remember the category it won, but what it did was it gave me belief, right. And I felt ecstatic. Felt almost like a film star when I found it.
Did they give you a prize?
They gave me a shield, which I returned the year after. Right. But it's the thing that without it, I might not have got to the point where I thought this could work.
Right.
But winning that really brought me up a few levels mentally, right, and made me believe that, I could possibly do this.
Was it a colour photograph or
no, black and white?
You black and white.
It aroused certain controversy. I found out years later in the higher echelons of Texaco, because the photograph basically was quite a long shot, and it was taken near a place called Ross Crowther.
Yes, another place well.
On the horizon, you had the refinery, and above the refinery, you had lots of dark clouds, which I dodged and burned to look a bit more dramatic, shall we say.
Yeah.
But in the foreground, there was like an old fortified mansion house
Yes.
with a tower.
Yeah.
You might have seen it,
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I entitled it Neighbours from Hell, or Neighbour from Hell. And apparently the PR department at Texaco went a little bit nuclear.
Well, they weren't going to employ you to do any.
Apparently they were threatening the Welsh Photographic Federation, I think that's correct, with they were going to sue them for defamation or something.
Good gracious me!
Yeah, I know. It's quite hilarious.
And were you? Did you make? Or was the conscious? You obviously made a conscious decision to do stuff in black and white.
Yeah.
What was the reasoning and the?
I'd always been quite drawn to it. I would never have described myself over the years as someone who kind of accumulated photography books. I might buy the occasional one every couple of years, which just jumped out at me. But it was always black and white images, which I felt more involved with, more drawn to.
Right.
I mean, I've got a set of images on the wall which I took in Tuscany in 2002. And it just did something that colour didn't. It just sort of extracted this fairly emotive response, whereas colour might leave me a bit, uninvolved.
Well, it's interesting you talk about an emotive response. Emotive response in what respect?
My preferred day out, if I'm going out to photograph landscape, is finding a farmhouse, possibly abandoned, but still virtually intact, with maybe some hills or whatever behind, or they're set in a nice landscape, so that when you photograph it, I'm taking a photograph which I hope will appeal to people enough for them to want to buy it. But I also want them to buy it so that they can look at it and project their own narrative onto it, their own story, their own backstory, their own feelings. Because buildings, I think, a wide sweeping landscape of, say, forests, river, mountains is wonderful, it's beautiful. But I don't really get any kind of human narrative out of it. There's obviously a natural world element, but if you've got an old farmhouse or cottage or chapel such as Harmony, these places are used by people, and people are always more interesting than trees, I think. Their backstories are.
Yes.
So if I stumble across an abandoned farm, I'm stood in front of it thinking, why is it empty? Who lived here? Was it a happy place? What sadness happened here? And I can visualize the people walking around the place, and I can hear the noises of people shouting and dogs barking and chickens running around, and yet it's totally silent. So I'm hoping that when people buy them, they buy them perhaps for that reason.
And hence the black and white giving you that sort of element of sometimes of the unknown, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I think with black and white, again, this is just my opinion, black and white doesn't give the whole game away. You're dealing in shades and tones and light and dark. And depending a lot of the time on the mood you're in when you look at it, you see things which, if you're in a different mood, you wouldn't see. It's got a lot more latitude for interpretation yourself, rather than colour images perhaps just put the whole show on the plate, and you don't really have to do an awful lot of work.
Yeah. I've been sort of musing of late about what I do as a photographer, and I've come to the conclusion that a lot of my work, even if I'm doing landscape work, is autobiographical in a lot of sense. Do you feel that at all?
Yeah, I do in some ways. I'm like I say, I'm drawn to this wanting to produce an image which is attractive enough so that when someone's flicking through a browser in a gallery, they sort of stop and go, I've got to buy that. So I want that, but I also want to straddle a line, a kind of semi-documentary line where I'm recording something which, I mean, there's a farmhouse in the Preseli Hills called Trinant,
Yes.
which I first photographed 10, 11 years ago when it was almost intact.
Yeah, and there's no roof on it anymore.
Now it's collapsed into a state of utter ruin.
Yes.
And for me now, I wouldn't bother going back there because the roof is gone. So for me, it's harder to imagine that it was ever lived in.
Right. Okay.
It's gone past that point. Whereas when I first visited there 10, 11 years ago, when, maybe a few dozen slates had caved in, but the roof was intact, it was easy to imagine that it was a house and a home. Now it's just a ruin. And I suppose it is, because of my own personal experiences, I do get drawn towards images which perhaps have a darker heart to them.
I was just about to bring that up.
Yeah.
So
I don't do Visit Wales stuff.
no, no. Can you share those dark feelings?
Yeah, I'm a great believer that it's actually quite important for everybody to have not so much darkness in them that it overwhelms them, but darkness so that you can explore different avenues and different aspects of life. I occasionally come across people who seem eternally happy and cheerful, and they're quite annoying. Because you think to yourself, you can't be like that all the time, surely. There must be some... I mean, I'm overall, I'm a very happy person, but I actually enjoy's the wrong word. I actually welcome the ability to explore a little bit of darkness, a little bit of drama, a little bit of bleakness. And if you live in West Wales all year round, the sun doesn't shine all the time.
No, certainly, and
Hardly shines at all actually anymore.
and autumn and winter, and you note that on your website that autumn and winter and early spring.
And if you're photographing a landscape and a third or 2/3 of that landscape is sky, if it's clear blue, it's just god awful boring.
Yeah.
But if it's stormy and dark and threatening and moody and mean,
Yes.
it's much, much more exciting.
Yeah, let's go take a little step back. You talked about winning with that photograph that you took of the refinery.
Neighbour from hell.
The neighbour from hell. And that gave you the confidence to expand your work. Were you, at that time, were you looking at anybody else's work, or were you pursuing your own vision of what your photographic career would be?
I've never been, without wanting to sound disparaging, I've never been a kind of photographic anorak, There's some photographers who, all due respect to them, they have bookshelves full of different photographers' work, and they consume it and they absorb it, and I never really did that. I just had something in me which said I wanted to go out and take black and white photographs. I had seen a little bit of Faye Godwin's work, but I'd never bought a book of hers, just occasionally come across a magazine article, maybe in the Sunday Times, and it sparked something, perhaps, and maybe subconsciously when I started to take photographs seriously, perhaps she was there in the background, so the work is fairly similar. But otherwise, I could hardly really name you any photographers. I know Ansel Adams, because people have bought me Ansel Adams books for Christmas and my birthday. And, yeah.
So, that picture, confidence, where did it go next?
I suppose in a way, and this is going to sound quite strange, in a way my job was so god-awfully mentally unhinging and threatening to rob me of my sanity. I think I've put that in a nutshell fairly well.
Yes.
That it literally did drive me out. If I'd have had a job which, and lots of people do have jobs like this, where they kind of neither love it nor loathe it, they just go to work, I would probably still be there. So it literally drove me into contemplating something completely off the radar, a total curveball. Mm-hmm. And Anna, my wife at the time, she still is, I used to come home from work and she would say, "Oh, how's work today?" As you do. And in the end, she gave up asking because it just wasn't worth it. So she was quite happy when I came up with this ridiculous notion that I would pack in my government secure pensioned job and go off and do this ridiculous thing of taking black and white photos and selling them and making money.
Right.
She was quite happy with that.
Had you shown any work at all, or was it purely stuff that you maybe shared with your family, shared with your wife, or was it something that was entirely your own man-shed type project?
I showed them to Anna, but I was very aware of the fact that she was bound to say they're great, aren't they? Which is always the trap of any aspiring photographer, is never to rely on the judgment of people who are bound to be nice. So the only way I could find out was whilst I was still working, because I suppose I was quite fortunate in the job I had in that I could shed hours incrementally until I reached a crossover point where I thought, sod it. I'll just go the whole hog now. So there's about 12 months where I was shedding maybe every couple of months, 5 or 6 hours a week. And during that time, I had an exhibition in the Queen's Hall in Narberth. I think that was my first exhibition.
Good place to have an exhibition.
Yeah. And I sold some frames, sold some images, had some really good feedback, and then thought, yeah, why not? And I'd also approached a couple of galleries as well, and they'd said, yeah, we'll give it a go, and they'd started selling them.
Right, so you were hawking around your work, basically.
Yeah, so you just contact the gallery beforehand, never go in off the street because they hate it.
Yeah.
Contact them, arrange an interview, go in with some work, show it to them.
Right. And were you printing your own stuff at that time?
Yeah, I bought, it would have been A3 printer. It was a good printer. Mm-hmm. So I had that one. I've got a different printer now, obviously. So that was the beauty of it, and it comes back to this need to do digital. Is you take the photograph, you compose it, but then, in my opinion, the most important part then is how you post-process it.
Indeed.
You can post-process it so that it does nothing to anyone. Compositionally, it's great, but the image just has no soul.
Yes.
Or you can compose it really well and post-process and get it so that it prints the same as it's in your head.
Yes.
And then hopefully it'll work.
So there was a conscious decision to create photography in order to sell.
Yeah.
In order to make a living.
Yeah.
And
it had to be a commercial activity.
Right. And so that adds a different dimension to photography in many respects.
I could have got commissions off the Arts Council to photograph balls of string or something. But that didn't really didn't really attract me. Or a piece of plastic on a beach.
So you were yeah. Well, we'll talk about that later, perhaps. But you. The interesting thing, when did that? Because I suppose, and correct me if I'm incorrect, I'm wrong. But the seminal moment, I guess, from your was creating a book, I guess, wasn't it? And that's what That's what's tripped you on into other projects. Had you conceived that book? Had it been something you were thinking about over a long period of time? Was it the Pembrokeshire book that came first?
Yeah.
Had you conceived that over a long period of time, or was it just again the commercial element coming into your head?
I started seriously, I suppose, in 2005 when I left work. Then after about 3 years, the work was selling well in galleries. I had a website from which I was beginning to sell work as well. Then I thought, what is the next logical step? And I thought, if I could have a book, that'd be nice. Then I'd be really impotent. So I approached Graffeg in Cardiff, Peter Gill, and it's just purely one of those beautiful coincidences that I sent him some sort of postcard size images in the post and an introductory letter, and he liked it. And I went up for an interview with Peter and had a chat with him, explained my vision of the Pembrokeshire book.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah,
then?
sure.
What was the vision?
The vision was a book, a purely selfish book, of single page black and white landscapes with a caption. 50 of them in the book. So single page image, caption opposite. And he bought it. And he didn't... fair dues to Peter, either he is a visionary or he's completely naive. I'm not sure which one.
Or probably seeing the
Or
commercial...
probably a combination of both.
Or maybe even seeing the commercial...
Perhaps,
aspect
yeah.
of it.
I mean, in all honesty, what I proposed to him was, for a publisher, was just madness. Because publishers don't, unless it's a huge, huge international name, they don't touch purely landscape black and white books with a barge pole because they just don't sell them. But he saw something, thankfully. And the book came out in 2009. And it's still selling now. I still sell copies now. They're still printing it now. It's gone through a number of editions. And now I'm starting to think about maybe producing sort of a second version for maybe 10 years after the first. If I'd have approached another publisher, they would, in all likelihood, have said, love the photos, the book will never sell. Thankfully, he said, I love the photos, and I think we can do this.
Yes, because it's a departure from what Graffeg do. Graffeg do colour books.
Yeah, normally, yeah. I mean, they're very good at printing photos, photography. But up until that point, so 2008, 2009, they've changed a lot since then. They were dealing mainly in kind of very Welsh-centric books, landscape Wales, in colour, villages, market towns, kind of books which maybe make a crossover between photography books and guide books sort of things. But now they're unrecognisable from what they were then as regards their output. But yeah, Peter had faith. And even though I'm completely irreligious, it was nice to come across somebody with faith.
Yeah, obviously, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all, but you obviously have a business sense. which is kind of, and we've talked to lots of photographers, and probably the most successful ones do have this kind of business side in their head, which clicks in. So you must understand that world.
Well, I did I did a business degree about 20 years ago. So that kind of gave me an awareness of marketing and producing things that people want to buy. I'm trying to think of the thing that they used to ram down our throats as the right product in the right place at the right price. Sounds horrible, but it works, and it's true. Although it is true with the vast majority of things, but with something like maybe limited edition photography, I mean, the prints I sell in galleries, I would consider them to be expensive. Mm-hmm. And I expect a lot of people look at them and think, I'm not paying that. But because it's a niche product, there's just enough people out there who are willing to invest in it and buy it because they want it on their wall. They can buy much cheaper photographs if they want.
Yeah. You use the terminology fine art on your website as well.
Yeah.
And I'm always intrigued by that terminology because I never really fully understand what it means in photographically.
No.
And I was wondering maybe you could sort of help me with that.
I think it's a combination of factors. I think it's a kind of a thing is with it, as we said a while back, I'm a commercial photographer in the respect that if I don't sell work, I don't pay my bills. I can't really go off on flights of fancies and photograph things which I can't sell. But the phrase fine art photography is probably invented by some kind of marketeer somewhere. It's marketing speak in a way. But by saying it, I suppose, maybe it's lost a little bit of its currency over the years because everybody uses the phrase, even if the photographs they take, perhaps not that engaging. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a process of the fact that the photographs are limited in editions, so it's not like endless. It's also, I think, down to particularly the printer you use. The printer I use is pretty good. Because if you're producing black and white images, you need a printer that gets the tones.
Yes.
There's no point having steps in the tones because otherwise it looks really quite nasty and about 20 years old. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all remember the digital printers where you used to be able to see where it went from one tone to another.
Indeed, yes.
A beautiful demarcation between the tones.
Yeah.
So I think fine art, the phrase fine art adds a little bit of value and a bit of perception of value.
Okay. Because
a bit like prestige cars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Intrigued by your book, where you worked with writers, and it's the darkness thing again, isn't it?
Yes. Well, there's a book of murder. Doesn't get much darker.
No. So, where did that idea come from, and what sort of reaction did you get from the writers that you approached?
That came from maps. That just came out of the blue. Matthew from Graffeg phoned me and said that it's quite a long story, but somehow a writer called Anne Cleves, who has written books that have been serialised on television. I'm thinking of Vera, I think, on ITV with Brenda Blethyn, and Shetland on BBC One. So she's quite a prolific crime writer. She'd seen a copy of my Pembrokeshire book and flicked through it and thought, much like lots of people have previously, my word, there could be dead bodies buried in these landscapes somewhere, couldn't they? There's bound to be a shallow grave here somewhere. She saw the murderous quality in my work, which I suppose I should take as a compliment. And she, as part of a group of writers called rather cheerily the Murder Squad, and they kind of challenge each other and do little short stories, and then they invited some other writers in. So altogether there was 12 writers, including her, and the idea was that they were all invited to choose an image from the Pembrokeshire landscape book and use the image as the catalyst for the story.
Okay.
And that's how it came about.
Well,
really.
So serendipitous things happen through your work.
Yeah, and that is part of the... I think that's part of the beauty of doing what I do, is that I get up each day and I don't know what's going to happen.
Right, okay.
To a certain extent, it's a bit like the Hinterland book.
Yeah.
That just came out of just a pretty sort of ordinary little exchange on Twitter with one of the producers of Hinterland, who it just so happened had seen my work previously, and in fact I later learned that they'd printed some photos out from a previous book to use in their pitch to get funding for the series. And he asked if I wanted to do a book for Hinterland. That was purely a happy coincidence. And they just happen not as frequently as I'd like, but enough.
Yeah. I'm also intrigued that, and I noticed on the wall here you have a Nap Fisher.
Yeah.
Nap Fisher had influenced the way you see landscape.
Yeah. If there's one artist which I would look at and think to myself, if I was an artist, that was what I would do, it's him. I love sort of just the sparing, dark nature of his images. They're not over-painted. He's very aware of, obviously, light and shade, or almost pure white and pure black. And he sort of built his images are more like blocks.
Yes.
Sort of detailed blocks on a canvas. And I must admit, I do look to his... If there's one artist that I would look at and think, like I say, if I were an artist, that's how I would paint, it would be him.
Have you tried painting?
When I was in school, yes, and I was awful. I have no artistic ability whatsoever. Trust me.
You talk about the story of Wales told through its landscape. How do you capture that narrative? Because it's fine turning up at a place, and you've explained how you think about people being in that place and animals being in that place and the commotion of life being in that place. But there are some places, and there are some places that you photographed that have no buildings in them. Yeah. So where does the narrative of Wales come out in those pictures?
Sheep. I think, I mean, the particular parts of Wales which could only be Wales, regardless of whether there's a building in the picture or not, they're quintessentially Welsh, if you like. And it's just, as I'm driving around and walking around, it's hard to distill it down to being able to say what it is, you know. It's just there. It's just I see something and I photograph it. I try, even if it's just, I know it's slightly cliched, even if it's just a barbed wire fence or a track leading off over the hill or a gate slightly open, just anything. If I was to look at all the photographs I've taken, I would probably find that the vast majority of them have got some hint or clue as to somebody's been there and done something. They've put up a fence, they put up a gate, they've dug a ditch, they've put up a telegraph pole, and it's all that attracts me, really.
Right, because the one probably thing that's there's this space which was once filled by people, and there's a famous Welsh poet called Walter Williams who and he talks about fields being full of people.
Yeah.
In his poetry, one specific poem he has, and your landscapes. Although we have an idea that there were people there.
Yeah.
You very rare, or I can't think of other than your Hinterland book, etc. But and that's a different genre completely.
Yeah.
But there are no people
No.
in your books.
No.
Was that a specific reason? Is that what was the theory behind that?
Firstly, I thought people would they're distracting. Particularly, I mean, the thing is, when I turn up at these places, what I see is not modern people. I see people from the past.
Okay.
I might visualize maybe the farm that is now empty in 1935 or something.
So would you have preferred to be a photographer in 1935 as a James Ravilius type photographer who specifically recorded
I mean, James Ravilius, I've got his book, I think An English Eye, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And it's the most beautiful book.
Yes.
And what he did in Devon in the 1970s and 80s was extraordinary.
Yeah.
But of course, he was tasked with recording a way of life which the trustees at Beeford, the Beeford Archive, thankfully they were aware that it was on its way out. Yeah. It's kind of almost a form of subsistence farming.
Yes.
Extreme poverty, but also, looking at the photographs, extreme happiness. Because these people didn't consider themselves poor. They considered themselves to be happy. I just wish some people these days would have that attitude, perhaps. Anyway, politics.
But the absence of people was I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah, the absence of people in my photographs was a deliberate act, in that I didn't really want people there distracting from the building and the landscape.
Okay.
And particularly, I knew that if there were people in it, they wouldn't be. They probably wouldn't appeal to people enough to buy, because I wouldn't particularly want to buy a beautiful landscape with an old farmhouse in if there was some sort of farmer walking across the foreground who was quite obviously a part of the picture. Maybe in the middle to far distance, fine. Then it becomes more a documentary image or a reportage style image, which thankfully I'm doing a bit of that now for the book I'm working on at the moment. But for me, one of the things that also drew me to these places is the solitude and the complete loneliness, as in it's just me.
Right. So,
I mean, I very, very rarely come across anybody on my travels when I'm out and about.
Yeah, I see, because we're coming back to my supposition earlier that that what I photograph are self-portraits, and in a way, you're saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's kind of documentary photography, but without the people.
Yeah, and it's that loneliness. I mean, I mean, you must. I mean, I enjoy that loneliness. Not in a bad way.
I think it's great. I think it's very. And again, I think perhaps, and again, it's just my opinion, these days people are afraid to be alone. If they haven't got a ping on their Facebook profile, if they post something on Facebook and they don't get immediate responses, they're thinking, "Oh my God, what's going on?"
Well, what do you think about what? I mean, that's another. We just go off on a little tangent here. Social media and Instagram and stuff like that, which is gradually taking over the sort of
people's brains.
Indeed. But from a photographic point of view, creating books and prints, but people are now the whole driving force seems to be not to actually have a physical item anymore. What are your thoughts on
Social media is important for me. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they are important in communicating to people because if you want to communicate with people, you have to use the mediums which they're using.
Yeah.
For example, occasionally I get phoned by newspapers or magazines saying, "Oh, would you like to advertise in our publication?" I say, "No, thanks. I never, ever spend any money on advertising in hard copy, ever. It's a complete waste of money. Total waste of money." But by targeting on Facebook accounts and on Twitter and on Instagram, by using their targeting tools, it might sound a bit mercenary, but you can get to the people, in amongst those millions of people, you can get to those few individuals who might see your work flash across their screen and think, "Oh, that's good. I'll like it or share it or comment it or whatever." So in that respect, I think social media is great for me. But I do despair at the amount of time people, again, this is just my opinion, people waste on screen time, on perhaps desperately looking for likes and shares and comments. Yeah, I mean, people who, and I hope you two have never done it, and if you have, you'll have to leave immediately, photograph their supper and put it on Facebook.
Yeah.
Why? It's a plate full of food. And most of the time it looks horrible. It looks distinctly unappetizing. Why would anybody do that?
Yeah. You don't photograph your cat, I guess.
Well, if I had one, no, I wouldn't. I think part of it is, I think, social media has very much democratized people in the respect that everybody now is a publisher.
Yes.
And can communicate their thoughts, ideas, wishes, hopes, fears, photographs of their supper, etc., to a much wider audience. Don't know whether that's a good thing or not. I don't know.
You've had a little sojourn, shall we say, into colour photography. I was looking at your website, and detail has been. I love detail as well. Detail is an interesting aspect of photography that I quite enjoy. And you've been looking at rust and paint and stuff like that. So, being a black and white photographer, I hate to put you into a box, but I'll put you in a little box with that, because that's what brought you success as a photographer. So what's made this leap into dabbling with colour?
I think it's much like the book I'm doing at the moment. It's the need to not be in a particular box all the time. It's the need to just look a bit wider, look outside what you normally do, challenge yourself a little bit perhaps. And photographs I'm taking, which again, hopefully I've been chatting to Peter and he's interested in doing a book on it, will be completely different. But it's really enjoyable. Finding...
the book you're working on currently, yes?
No, it's
Are you going to talk about the book that you're doing currently?
Have I been sort of dripping hints and...
Yeah, you very loud ones, actually, yes.
I'm like one of those really infuriating sort of B or C list celebrities who go on Breakfast News and go, "Oh, have I mentioned the book yet?" The book I'm working on at the moment is, like I say, it is being a bit of not a challenge, but a refreshing change. It's with... it's about Pembrokeshire. It's about communities and working practices and celebrations in Pembrokeshire, which perhaps in a generation may not be around anymore. So it did Hen Galan in the Quine Valley on January the 13th, which is quite an unusual celebration.
It is indeed, yes.
Went over to Caldy Island a couple of weeks ago. Again, wonderful, fascinating place, but you know the community of monks here is shrinking by the year, I think. And it's so I'm doing the photography, so it's very much a little bit of landscape, a little bit of detail, but mostly people. So it's
that you've avoided in the past,
which I've avoided in the past, but which I'm really enjoying. So it's kind of portraiture, as in Head and Shoulders, asking people to look at the camera, and then more documentary style, where you're just looking at people doing things and photographing them, just going about their business.
Yeah, I was on Caldy, and I met a gentleman who was dry stone walling there.
Yeah,
and he was a really interesting man, and he'd worked a lot for in North Wales on dry stone walls in North Wales.
yeah,
And I spent about an hour and a half with him, talking to him and watching him work and
Yeah.
stuff. And really interesting, gentle people.
yeah,
And but still pursuing tasks which will last for an awfully long time.
yeah. And it was a wonderful. I'm doing the photography, and the person who's writing the chapters is Jamie Owen from
Right.
BBC Wales.
Yes.
Because Jamie's from Pembrokeshire as well, so it's got a particular kind of resonance with him.
Yes.
So he's writing the narrative, the chapters, the copy,
Yes.
and I'm doing the photography, and it's been great. I mean, we've done, like I say, we've been to Caldy, we did Hinterland, we did this wonderful couple of days down on Castle Martin Range, where the MOD came to an agreement with the hill farmers in the Preseli's back in the 50s, I think, that each winter, each autumn, they could bring all the sheep down to graze on the range, because obviously it's a peninsula and it's low-lying, so it's quite temperate, quite warm. And then each April, they all come down with loads of sheep trucks and round them all up and take them back. And it was just a wonderful day. Just with people who just loved their work, loved their job, you know. I was talking to Denzel, who's probably, I hope Denzel won't be offended by this, he's probably in his early 70s, still fit as anything, but you could just see the joy in his eyes surrounding all these sheep up, thousands and thousands of them. It's like being out on some kind of Australian sheep ranch, you know? They were all bringing them in with dogs and their Land Rovers and quad bikes and all these real characters who'd done it for decades, been going back and forth for years and years and bringing their families with them. Denzel had his 2 daughters with him who don't farm, but just want to come down and do it with him for the day. And it's perhaps something that maybe in a generation won't happen anymore, because the statistics showing people going into farming or taking over, particularly hill farms, which
and Brexit might have
might have an effect. So it's just capturing all these things, which maybe they won't be around forever.
So obviously you have a very important relationship with Graffeg.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, because all your books are published through them.
Yeah.
And I think, do they sell your work as well? They sell prints of your work as well?
They do display them online.
Right, okay.
So they sell the occasional print.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
The Hinterland experience is an interesting one, and going on set and being involved with a production company in an area which presumably you didn't know very well.
Yeah, I mean, Ceredigion I had photographed a little bit previously for a book I did of Wales, which came out about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'd been to the Tybee pools.
Yes.
Which I loved.
Yes, and beautiful.
When Anna saw the photograph, she thought, why would anybody ever go there? Because it looks like the perfect place to bury a problem.
Yes, it's wild.
It's just beautiful. I just absolutely loved. Oh, I don't know. It's the Tivy Pools is unlike anywhere else I've ever been in Wales.
Mm-hmm.
It is so unique and distinctive to that area, the Cambrian Mountains. But yeah, the Hinterland book was a joy, really. It was, and going on, I'd watched Hinterland from the very first episode and loved it from the very start, primarily for the cinematography and the photography in it,
Yes.
which does feel very cinematic.
And the bleached.
Yeah, it's that desaturated
Yes.
colour look. It's very distinctive. But the directors of photography, and indeed Ed, who created the programme, Ed Thomas and Ed Talvan, they realised that the landscape could actually be a part of the show rather than just incidental.
And help sell it.
Yeah. So unlike a lot of other cop shows, as Ed Thomas would say, instead of just having one shot after another of people's head and shoulders, talking heads, they weren't afraid to pull right back and allow the characters to walk into this quite vast landscape and almost be swallowed up by it.
Indeed. It's really interesting as well from because I worked in television and stuff. Is the way they use the way costume is used in that series is quite interesting, because the tendency is to put the girl in red. I've noticed.
Yeah.
And the main cop is always drab.
Yeah, Richard Harrington looked. I mean, not luckily, perhaps, but Richard has a particularly lugubrious look about him.
Yes.
Sort of slightly down, and
Yes.
he's troubled.
So, tell me from an editorial point of view, do Graffeg have an editorial say on the contents of your book?
They, again, I don't know why, but they've never really sort of come back and said, oh, we need to do this differently, or you need to revisit this, or you need to rethink this. I've been very fortunate that what I've supplied them with, be it imagery or in a few of the books where I've written captions, they've just taken and run with and laid out in book form, and we've gone through it together, and they've signed it off and printed it, which...
So you take the whole package, that you take the photographs and the design concept to them, yes?
The design concept I leave to them to a certain extent, but thankfully myself and Peter and to perhaps a lesser extent Matthew, we kind of visualise the same thing. The first book I did with Pembrokeshire was just one whole page image and a caption. The second book, the Wales book, was a bit different in that the photography was similar, but they were more like photo essays, in that you had 2, 4, 6 or 8 pages of a location where you had wide shots, close-up shots, details, to give more of a sense of actually being in that environment.
Right. Do you enjoy that format more than the single image format?
I've come to appreciate it more, and particularly again with the Hinterland book. I was very aware of photographing, like I say, details, tiny things. Arrive at a farmhouse, photograph the farmhouse, but photograph also the door and the door frame, which has fallen out of the outbuilding onto the floor. Photograph just this old truck wheel in the grass, so that it gives anybody reading it gives them more of an all-round experience of actually visiting the location themselves, rather than just one sort of wow image. It's the details sometimes that tell the story, perhaps more than the big pictures.
Indeed, they do sometimes. Yes, they do sometimes. I agree with you on that point. Is again, you've was it last year that you brought out the book? You've been working with a couple of architects about buildings in Wales.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a completely different genre of photography.
It is, yeah.
And quite difficult in many respects.
It was a different... Yeah, it was, again, but it comes back to just wanting to sometimes try something new.
Did you enjoy that experience?
If I'm honest, I didn't enjoy that book as much as the others. It didn't give me much back as regards the final output.
Yes, because they are pictures in good weather.
Yeah, mostly in good weather.
Yeah.
And it was enjoyable as regards pushing myself to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I would ever do anything similar again is unlikely.
Mm-hmm. Right. Obviously, you're taking photographs in order to incorporate in books or in exhibitions, or that you can sell from your website, etc. I'm intrigued to know whether you actually do stuff just for you.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've got a load of photographs which I would probably never get into a book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes you have to just go out and not... Although, the thing is, I'm very fortunate in that when I go out and photograph, I'm photographing the kind of things that I want to photograph, but which also just happen, it would appear, to be sellable as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I'm going out and thinking, right, I must have my commercial head on today and photograph stuff which I can sell.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the stuff I want to photograph anyway. So there's not kind of two different types of photography going on.
Mm.
The colour detail stuff which I've done probably started out as something which I just fancied doing, as something a bit different. But then when I looked at them, I thought, and then actually started to sell some of them as images, I realised that, as well as being an enjoyable sort of curveball activity away from what I normally do, they also appear to perhaps have a commercial element as well, which is quite fortunate.
Yeah. Just to go on another little different sort of angle. How we were talking earlier about how important it is that you prefer, like I do, to photograph in autumn, winter, and January, February, good times to shoot, good light. How important is it for you to understand weather and what weather can do to it's because I'm obsessed with it. Are you?
Yeah, I mean, today is a lovely day. I would never dream of going out today.
No, neither would I.
It's a complete waste of time.
Yes.
I am a weather watcher if I'm going out. The perfect day would be big, thick, heavy clouds, a bit of rain, sun comes out, you get kind of the sun on the wet surfaces, but still with those big, heavy clouds, and then maybe it starts raining again, etc., etc.
Yes.
Autumn, winter is better for black and white because the sun stays at a lower angle in the sky, so you get more shadows.
Yeah.
You get more light and dark.
Yes.
In the summer, I wouldn't even bother. I mean,
no.
The light in the summer, if the sun comes out in the summer, which it's doing less and less, any time between 11 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon is a complete waste of space because there's hardly any shadows. And the sun is so bright that there's glare off everything. And all the trees and the plants and the shrubs are too full and leafy, and the list goes on.
Yes.
And it just doesn't work. It just doesn't have that atmosphere, that drama.
Right. Let's jump into... We were talking about fine art photography, and some people And I think you mentioned in our earlier that plastic bottles on a beach.
There's a place for it, I'm sure.
In what respect?
As with any creative industry, be it art, photography, sculpture, whatever, there's always going to be an element of the emperor's new clothes. As in, if enough people in positions of persuasion and power decree that a certain person is almost godlike in their ability to produce these wonderful sculptures, pottery. There's some potters we could think of perhaps who are a little strange. Artists, photographers, if they produce work which this group of higher intellectual people think is the new greatness or whatever, then these people can be feted and put up on a pedestal. But when you sometimes, and again it's all very objective, obviously, sometimes when you look at what they produce, you might be inclined to think, why? What's the big deal? Why is this person getting so much attention and money?
Yes, specifically, we're talking about Arts Council money. Then
I sometimes groan inwardly at some of the stuff that people produce with public money, which I find disengaging, lacking in merit, lacking in art, lacking in any substance or soul or capacity at all, really.
In one way, it's I think probably.
But then they might say that about my photography, so it's an objective issue.
Yeah, but you come from it in a different at a different angle, because you've come to to photography quite late.
Yeah, in a respect of actually selling it and making a living from it.
Yeah, but and so your angle and your insight into how it all works is quite different to many photographers in Wales. I mean, I can think of instances where we've talked to specific people who have said, yes, I'm a commercial photographer, I do work because I need to make money.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a photographer, but I get hired by people and I get commissioned to do stuff. So it's and probably I'm not very good at selling myself, but obviously you've come in at this late stage in your life. I mean, how old when you started? You were in your 40s?
40, yeah.
I mean, that's quite late to come into a profession, I guess. So so you come in with a different attitude.
I think I've never studied photography. I've never been to college to do photographic courses. So I've never been, how can I say this? I've never been conditioned or tainted by other people's ideas of what a good photograph should be. I've basically produced what I want to produce completely innocently without any input from anyone else. And I was talking to a lady at a show a while back, and she said, "Oh, my daughter loves your work. She's doing a photography course in London. She hates it." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Oh, because they're trying to get her to photograph things which she thinks are just absolute pants. They're getting her to do this and do that and explore this and explore that." And her daughter gave the course up and went off to do another course because she thought that what she thought of as photography in her mind was disparaged and looked down upon by academic circles as not being worthy of photography. And perhaps perhaps some courses or lecturers or professors of photography or whatever would look at my work and think it was, oh, it's a bit romantic, oh, it's a bit twee, oh, it's a bit last century, it's a bit this, it's a bit that. I don't really know. To be perfectly honest, I don't know care either, really. But I think some of the stuff I see, some of the photography I see from photographers who are allegedly regarded in high esteem, I can't see what the big deal is. And yet some photographers who are commercial photographers producing work to sell in galleries, I look at and it engages me and draws me in, and yet I know that they would be looked down upon as a bit overly commercial, perhaps. Mm-hmm. It's like commercial's a bit of a dirty word, yes, and it has to be some kind of aesthetic thing that doesn't really work for anyone except someone who has a job in media or is a very highly paid public servant of some sort, rather than somebody who drives a van and thinks, "Oh, that's a nice photo. I like that."
I mean, we have a.
I'm waffling.
No, you're not.
I'm a waffler.
No, it's just good stuff. I mean, we have an agency in Wales, which is Photo Gallery in Cardiff, which is, to my mind, very Cardiff-centric, but who are meant to promote photography in Wales. Yeah. I mean, do you have any thoughts on them at all? Or
I've come across them a little bit. I think I've looked at a couple of things that they've had on. I doubt very much whether the kind of output I produce would be their cup of tea, perhaps. I don't know what it is. It might be just me, or it might be other people think the same. There seems to be a strand in photography and art where they're almost deliberately looking for stuff that is anti-photography or anti-art, whereas it's not really anything at all. Yeah. It's almost like a deliberate attempt to suck any kind of engagement out of the image, to make it, I don't know, completely anodyne and lacking in soul or story or narrative. It's almost like there's a disparaging view of anybody who tries to take a photograph that might appeal to a wide audience. I think that's it. It's this narrow clique attitude where the narrow clique want something for themselves which isn't understood by people outside of their kind of hierarchy. So they don't want somebody who might work in a call centre looking at a photograph that they consider to be of high art and thinking, yeah, I agree with you. They don't want that. They want, and it's the same with art as well, you know, the Saatchis and all the rest of it. It's this wanting to separate themselves from hoi polloi. And there's a dread fear that hoi polloi, and I notice I don't say the hoi polloi because then I'd be saying the polloi. Sorry. Hoi polloi, they don't want them joining in on their gig. They don't want them appreciating what they allegedly appreciate, even if they don't really appreciate it, but they have to be seen to appreciate it for fear of being pushed outside the circle. And I know this sounds possibly a little bit plebeian or whatever, but when I look at art or photography, if I think to myself, but I could do that, then suddenly it doesn't become art. It becomes something that I could do. You know, if I was to go to a modern art gallery, I would probably have a very bad afternoon because I would constantly go around thinking, but I could do that. So that to me then isn't art. Whereas if I look at A Turner painting, I couldn't do that.
No.
And when I look at a Turner painting, such as the Fighting Temeraire or whatever, being dragged up the Thames estuary, it just carries me away to another space, and I get absorbed by it, and I get completely entranced and drawn in. But at the same time, I look at it and think, I couldn't do that. That's way, way, way above my capabilities. He has captured something which I could never capture on canvas. But then if I looked at a Jackson Pollock or something, I would think, but I can throw paint on a floor. I can do that. I know it's a very simplistic argument, and I know it will get short shrift from people in the Arts Council and people who maybe pretend to like stuff which maybe they don't.
To jump back to work with your publisher, I mean, does he commission you? Does he say, yes, we want this book, we will give you X amount of money to do this book? How does it work, or is it purely commercial?
I think the only book that has come to me was the Starlings book, the short stories book, which just came out of nowhere. All the other books, I've come up with the idea and taken it to them. So the Pembrokeshire book, the Wales wide book, the Buildings book, I kind of conjured that up and co-opted somebody to do the writing. And also the Hinterland book, myself and Ed Talvan kind of came up with the idea. And then the book I'm doing with Jamie now, I kind of had this idea and emailed Jamie, and he said that he wanted to write he was wanting to get another book done, and he kind of liked the general idea, although he sort of tweaked the actual actual subject matter chapters. So I kind of come up with these ideas and they go with them.
Right.
Because, which is nice,
because
because then I feel like I own the idea.
Yeah, because, if I pitched for an idea for a book, for example, I pitch an idea to a publisher, and the publisher says yes, and, you go through the whole process. You have an advance, and then you have the finished product. Does it same work with Graffeg?
So I pitched the idea to them, and Peter kind of mulls it over, and it goes from there, really.
Cool.
And it's a nice... It's a good, seemingly a good relationship.
Well, obviously, because you're doing a lot of work for them, producing books for them, which they make money out of. Obviously,
hopefully,
everybody wins. Can you explain to me what the pitch was for the Hinterland book?
Well, Ed and I, we met up in Aberystwyth, and thankfully we both kind of visualised the same book, which was not necessarily a book purely about Hinterland, but Ed and Ed Thomas, the co-creator, they both pretty much fallen in love with the landscape of Ceredigion. So they, I think it's fair to say, they also wanted to pay homage and pay their respects to the landscape, as well as have a book that paid homage to the programme. So it's kind of two books in one. It's a book of Hinterland, but even if you've never seen an episode, or if you have, you don't like it, if you like Ceredigion, you can still buy the book. So, it like I say, it's two books in one. So I had a chat with Ed, and then I got in touch with Graffeg, and they were obviously very happy to produce a book for probably the most successful television that's ever been made in Wales. It's exported to countless countries around the world. So it went from there, really. So that's why the cover is okay. I mean, if somebody looks at the cover, they're probably going to think it's more Hinterland than Ceredigion, but hopefully there's enough clues in the cover to tell them that it's not just the programme.
Yeah. Have you been tempted to contact other producers, and because Bang is currently on S4C.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
Yeah,
It's
interesting.
set in Port Talbot.
Port Talbot,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, for the Hinterland book, I think it works. It works partly because obviously the programme has got huge resonance and huge audiences. But it also works because of where it was set. So the landscape does lend itself very well to black and white landscape photography, really. And that narrative thread again, that wanting to get a narrative into the essays.
Yes. Is it your? It must be your picture on the front cover. Is your picture of?
All of the colour stuff in it
Yes.
is done by a great photographer called Warren Orchard.
Yes.
So Warren's work, I think, I'm estimating it, I think it covers about a third of the book.
Right, okay.
And then about 2/3 is black and white landscape.
Okay. You're currently working on a new project. What ambitions do you have, or what ideas do you have floating around in your head about future projects?
Well, I've nearly got this book finished with Jamie. So there's a couple more chapters to do on that, which is going to be fun. Then I'm working with Peter with the possibility of this kind of peeling paint and rust book,
Right, yes.
which I'm enjoying. I've got quite a bit of material for it already, but maybe I've got another 6 months of just going around and looking for subject matter. So there'll be that, and then I got a few more ideas in my head. I would love to perhaps after 10 years, 2019, bring out another Pembrokeshire book.
Will you revisit some of the places that you've been to
Yeah,
before?
I think I would. I would revisit some of the places, but
Even
just try to reinterpret them.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And perhaps the second version, would it be a different layout? I think I'd probably approach it differently.
Can you elucidate on that? Or?
Yeah, probably more the photo essay approach rather than the single one big image approach.
Okay.
I think the photo essay approach works better with regards giving the reader, the viewer, more of an ability to sort of transport themselves there.
Yeah.
And besides that, just read a lot more books of my own that I buy. Take it easy and drink lots of coffee and not get too stressed.
Cool. Nice place to end the conversation. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Emmy.